The bus stopped with a hiss, and the dust settled around my boots like a curtain falling after a long performance. 3 years. 3 years since I'd last seen my home. Since I'd kissed my wife's trembling lips and promised my daughter I'd be home before she got taller than me. She must have grown by now. I adjusted my duffel bag on my shoulder, stepped off the bus, and waited for the sound I'd replayed in my head through every firefight. The sound of my family calling my name. But there was nothing. The street was empty. No balloons. No welcome banner. No little girl running into my arms. Just a quiet suburban road, gray from the drizzle, the kind that makes everything look lonelier than it really is. I told myself they must be stuck in traffic. Or maybe they planned a surprise inside. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I walked to the driveway, same cracked pavement, same old mailbox, same wind chime that used to ring when my wife left for work. But the nameplate was gone. No Captain Ryan Hale anymore. Just a faint outline where the letters used to be. My hands went cold. I stepped closer to the front door, expecting to see the old welcome mat that said "Home is where you wait." But even that was... In its place was a taped piece of paper, wet from the rain, a letter from the realtor. Property, sold and vacated as of January. Access restricted. January. That was 8 months ago. I just stood there, the rain soaking through my uniform, my breath fogging the glass door that no longer opened for me. I knocked anyway. Once. Twice. Like muscle memory from a life I didn't belong to anymore. No answer. I pressed my forehead against the door. "Sarah?" "It's me." The sound of my own voice felt foreign. I hadn't said her name in months, not out loud. Silence answered me back. Then, in a weak attempt to fight panic, I turned around, scanning the street. Maybe they'd moved nearby. Maybe I'd see my daughter's bike or their old blue SUV. But all I saw were new cars, new neighbors, new curtains in old windows. The house wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't ours anymore. I dropped my duffel and sat on the curb. For a second, I almost laughed. The bitter kind of laugh you give when the universe decides to test your limits one more time. I had faced ambushes, airstrikes, and nights in the desert where I wasn't sure the sun would rise again. But none of that prepared me for this silence. When you're deployed, you think of home as something frozen in time, like a photograph, waiting for you to step back into it. But what I didn't understand until that moment was that time doesn't freeze for anyone. I remembered the day I left, my wife holding our daughter in her arms at the airport. She was 5 then, clutching my cap in her tiny fingers. "Promise you'll come back soon." "Daddy," and I said, "before you can spell my name." She laughed through tears, and Sarah whispered, "We'll wait." No matter how long, I believed her, because I needed to. But now, standing on this empty street, I realized people don't wait forever, especially when the person they're waiting for keeps choosing duty over home. I forced myself to stand. My knees felt weak, like they didn't recognize solid ground anymore. The rain had turned heavier, tapping against the windows, each drop a small, cruel reminder that time had kept moving without me. I walked around to the backyard. The fence gate creaked open. The old swing set was still there, half broken, rusted from neglect. I pushed it gently. It moved with a slow squeal, the same rhythm my daughter used to swing on while yelling, "Higher, Daddy, higher!" That sound echoed in my mind, and for the first time since coming home, my throat burned, not from the cold, but from everything I'd been holding back for years. Inside the house, I could still picture everything as it used to be. The smell of coffee, cartoons on TV, my wife's laughter echoing through the kitchen. But now, those memories felt like someone else's life, someone who got to come home before the world moved on, and that's when it hit me. The worst kind of humiliation isn't public. It's private. It's when you return from war expecting to be a hero, But the people you fought for already wrote the ending without you. I stood there until night fell, until the streetlights came on and my reflection stared back from the window. Tired. Scarred, a stranger wearing a soldier's uniform, I whispered. Almost to myself, did they really move on? Without me? The words hung in the air, heavier than my gear ever was. I picked up my duffel again, not because I knew where to go next, but because leaving felt easier than standing still. Every step away from that house felt like another page being torn out of the life I thought I still had. As I reached the corner of the street, I looked back one last time. The porch light flickered just once, and for a second my heart jumped, but it wasn't her. Just a motion sensor picking up a stray cat crossing the yard. I smiled bitterly. "Welcome home, soldier," I muttered to myself. The cat paused, stared at me with curious eyes, then disappeared into the dark. I envied it. No attachments. No promises, no ghosts. Then I walked on, toward nowhere in particular, and as the rain kept falling, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding since I stepped off that bus. Sometimes the hardest part of coming home is realizing there's no home left to come back to. I don't remember making the decision to break in. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe desperation, but a soldier learns early. When the door won't open, you find another way. The back window was cracked, a tiny flaw the realtor hadn't noticed. I pressed my shoulder against the frame, and with a quiet grunt, it gave way. The smell that met me wasn't the scent of home. No coffee, no detergent, no life, just dust and silence. It was strange how emptiness could feel so loud. I stepped inside and stood in what used to be the living room. The walls were bare, no family photos, no school drawings, no sign that laughter had ever lived here. But the outlines were still there, faint rectangles where picture frames had hung, patches of paint just a little less faded, ghosts of a family that used to be mine. I walked slowly, my boots echoing across the wooden floor. The sound sharp and hollow, every step seemed to summon memories. My daughter running barefoot, my wife chasing her with a towel, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. Now, there was only dust motes floating in pale light. Through broken blinds, I touched the wall near the kitchen. Doorway, my hand fit perfectly over the faint height mark still scratched into the paint. Lily, age 5. Lily, age 6. And then, nothing. No 7. No 8. The marks just stopped, like time had given up trying to measure her without me. I walked into the kitchen next. The counter was stripped bare, but one corner still bore the imprint of where the coffee maker used to sit, the same spot Sarah guarded like sacred ground. Every morning before I left for deployment, I'd stand right there, watching her pour coffee with that sleepy, half smile that could silence the world. She'd always ask, "You sure you have to go again, Ryan?" And I'd always answer the same way. "It's my duty." She'd shake her head, kiss my cheek, and whisper, "Just don't let your duty take you away from us." I thought she was exaggerating. Now I realized she was predicting my future. On the counter lay a single object, a photo album. It was old, the leather edges worn and curled, dust gathered thick along the spine. I picked it up and brushed it clean. Inside, the first few pages were full of life. Our wedding day, Lily's first steps, her kindergarten graduation, me in uniform, holding her hand, her eyes full of pride. But halfway through the album, I noticed something strange. Every picture that had me in it was gone. Torn out, the edges of each page were jagged, like someone had ripped them out in a hurry. I ran my finger along the torn edges, feeling the scars of absence. That's when it hit me. Sarah didn't just move on, she erased me, and somehow, that hurt more than if she'd simply stopped loving me. Erasure means she wanted to protect Lily from remembering, from the confusion, from the pain of a father who never came home when he said he would. I sat down on the floor, album in my lap, and let my back rest against the wall. The silence around me began to hum, like it was alive, breathing through the creaks and sighs of the old house. In that stillness, I started to remember the things I'd buried: the firefights, the desert heat, the smell of burning oil, and the moment everything went wrong. It was during my second tour. We were supposed to rotate home in a week. I had a ticket booked. A promise written in letters and phone calls. Then my convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. We lost 4 good men, and something inside me broke with them. When command offered an extension, a chance to see it through, I said yes. I couldn't walk away while their blood was still drying on desert sand. I told myself it was for honor, for closure. But truth was, it was for punishment. I couldn't bear to go home and look Sarah in the eye, knowing I failed someone else's sons. I pulled a chair from the corner, sat down and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it. Faint. Almost like imagination, the echo of laughter. Lily's giggle. Chasing across the hall, Sarah's voice. Soft and teasing. "Ryan, don't track mud in here." For a heartbeat, it felt like time folded back, like they were still here, just behind the next door. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see them. But the house was still empty. Just echoes. Nothing more. My hand brushed against something on the floor, a small envelope, yellowed and half torn. It was addressed to Captain Ryan Hale, no stamp. No return address. Inside was a note, written in my wife's handwriting. "If you find this, it means you came back too late." I tried, Ryan. I really did. But Lily needs stability, not promises. We waited as long as we could. Please. Don't come looking for us. Let her remember you as the hero she believes you are. My heart didn't break. It collapsed. I folded the note and stared at it until my vision blurred. Then I laughed quietly. Not from humor, but from disbelief. A hero. That's what they told my daughter I was. But heroes don't lose their families. Heroes come home. I looked around the hollow room, at the walls that once echoed with life, and realized something painfully simple. This house wasn't empty because they left. It was empty because I did. I stood up and took one last look around. The late afternoon light was cutting through the blinds, painting gold stripes across the floor. Dust floated through them like tiny spirits refusing to settle. I reached for the door, paused, and whispered to the silence, "I'm sorry I made you wait for a man who never came back." Then I stepped outside. The air was colder now, sharper, and though the world around me hadn't changed, I felt something inside me shift, like the echo of who I was finally caught up to the man I'd become. But as I reached the end of the street, I felt a strange pull, one that told me this wasn't the end of my journey. Somewhere out there, my family still existed, and I didn't know if I wanted forgiveness or closure. All I knew was that the echoes of that house would follow me, no matter how far I went. And for the first time since I came home, I realized I might never truly find it again. I checked into a cheap roadside motel that night, one of those places that smelled like cigarettes and rain-soaked carpets. The kind of place where people hide, not rest. The clerk didn't even look up when I slid my ID across the counter. He just said, "Military, huh? Welcome home," in a tone that sounded more like pity than respect. I forced a smile, took the key and went to my room. The door creaked open with a sigh, like it was tired of strangers too. I dropped my duffel on the bed and sat there in the dim orange light. For a long while, I just stared at the wall, blank, colorless, quiet, until I couldn't take the silence anymore. So I did what soldiers do when there's nothing left to hold on to. I unpacked. Inside the bag were clothes, a photo and a bundle of letters, wrapped, together with a piece of frayed string. My handwriting on the envelopes looked foreign to me now, like they belonged to a man who didn't exist anymore. Each letter was addressed to Sarah Hale, each one stamped. Each one marked return to sender. I untied the string and picked one at random. It was dated 2 years ago. Hey, love. I heard Lily started 3rd grade. I keep replaying her last birthday in my head. I still owe her that bike I promised. Tell her Daddy's saving up for something even better. I know this tour's longer, but I'll make it right when I get home. Always yours. Ryan. I smiled faintly, at my own stupidity. That letter had traveled halfway across the world just to find its way back to me. I opened another. This one was different. Heavier somehow. Sarah. I can't tell you what happened today, but I lost another soldier. I keep thinking about his wife getting that folded flag. What if that was you? What if Lily had to hear that knock on the door? Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier for both of you if I'd never come home at all. I stopped eating. The words blurred together through the sting in my eyes. Realized those letters weren't messages of love anymore. They were confessions, fragments of guilt dressed up as updates. And the saddest part? They never even reached the people they were meant for. As I sat there, I heard the rain pick up outside, soft at first, then angry. It felt fitting, the world crying for me because I didn't know how. I pulled out one last envelope, torn at the corner. The date on it was smudged, but the ink inside had survived. This one wasn't like the others. It was to Lily. My little star, Daddy's sorry he missed your school play. I bet you were amazing. I can't wait to see you shine in person. Every night out here, I look up at the sky and pick a star to talk to. I named it after you. Love you more than all the stars in the desert. Sky. I held that piece of paper against my chest and let out a shaky breath. She must have waited for a letter that never came, and when it finally did, it was returned. Unopened. The next morning, I went to the post office listed on the envelopes. A woman behind the counter, mid-50s, glasses perched on her nose, looked at me when I laid the stack down. Why were these all sent back? I asked quietly. She flipped through them. Her expression softened. Looks like forwarding wasn't possible. House was marked sold. No forwarding address on file. I leaned against the counter. So they just disappeared? She sighed, her tone careful. People move on, soldier. Sometimes faster than we expect. That word again. Soldier. It used to mean something. Now it just felt like a label for someone who gave everything and got nothing back. That night, I met up with an old comrade, Miller. He was one of the few who'd made it home with me. When he saw me, his face lit up, then dimmed the second he noticed my expression. Man, you look like you've been through hell twice, he said. I laughed dryly. Maybe I have. We sat at a diner booth, both staring at our untouched coffee. He finally asked, You find your family? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid one of the unopened letters across the table. He read the return to sender stamp, sighed, and nodded slowly. I told you, Ryan. Don't come home too late. Families don't freeze in time. I looked out the window, at the neon sign flickering in the rain. I thought I was doing the right thing, I said. You were, Miller replied, just for the wrong reasons. His words stayed with me the rest of the night. The truth was, I did choose duty. But not for honor, for escape. Out there in the desert, I could bury my guilt under mission briefs and orders. At home, I would have had to face Sarah's disappointment. Lily's growing resentment. It's easier to be a hero in uniform than a father in civilian clothes. But now, stripped of both roles, I didn't know who I was anymore. I went back to the motel and lined up all the returned letters on the table, in order by date. It was like watching my own timeline of disconnection, one envelope at a time. The first few were full of hope. Then came guilt. Then, silence. Each one a chapter in how I slowly disappeared from their lives. I realized something then. I hadn't just lost them. I had taught them how to live without me. Every time I said, just one more tour, I was teaching them to move on. Every unreturned call, every missed birthday, every empty promise. They were learning that their lives could keep going even if I wasn't in them. And eventually, they did. I gathered the letters, tied the string again, and tucked them into my bag. Not to keep them, but because I wasn't ready to let go just yet. Maybe someday I'd burn them, or bury them where I last saw her smile, but not tonight. Tonight, I needed them as proof. Proof that once, I had someone to write to. Proof that I wasn't always this ghost wandering between wars and memories. I turned off the light, lay back on the creaking bed, and stared at the ceiling, somewhere beyond it. Beyond the storm clouds, beyond everything I'd lost. My daughter was probably asleep, safe, loved, unaware that her father still whispered her name into the dark. And as the rain finally eased, I realized maybe the letters never reached home because I hadn't yet. Either I don't know what made me do it, maybe guilt, maybe that stubborn soldier instinct that refuses to surrender, even when there's nothing left to win. But one morning, I found myself parked on a quiet street 2 towns over, staring at a house I'd only ever seen in public records. It was theirs, or I guess hers. New paint. New mailbox. New life. Everything about it screamed, fresh start. I sat in the truck, fingers tight on the steering wheel, heart pounding harder than it ever did under gunfire. This was the mission I never trained for. No weapon, no armor. Just memories. Through the front window, I saw movement. A figure crossing the room. Sarah. Even from a distance, I knew that walk. She moved with the same calm grace she used to have when she'd hum while washing dishes, the one that made the whole house feel like Sunday morning. But there was something else, a shadow trailing behind her. A man's voice. A man's hand brushing her shoulder. And then, a laugh, a sound I used to live for, now belonging to someone else. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't anger that hit me. It was stillness. That kind of stillness that comes after an explosion, when everything's too quiet and your ears ring from the shock. Then, I saw her. Lily. Not the little girl from my memories. She was taller now, maybe 12 or 13. Hair longer, smile brighter. She looked like Sarah, but her eyes were mine. She stepped out onto the porch, holding a backpack, waving goodbye to her mom and to him. The man kissed her forehead before she ran off toward a waiting school bus. It pulled away, and I followed it with my eyes until it disappeared at the corner. That's when it hit me. My daughter had grown up believing someone else was her father. I sat there for a long time, watching the sunlight crawl across the hood of my truck. Part of me wanted to drive away, pretend I'd never found them. The other part, the one that had written those letters, crossed oceans, and carried guilt like a second dog tag, needed to see her up close, just once. So I waited. Hours passed. The man left for work. Sarah stayed behind. When I finally stepped out of the truck, my legs felt heavy. Each step toward that door was a war with myself. When I reached the porch, I noticed the same small plant she used to keep by our old front steps. Lavender, her favorite. It was blooming, healthy, back home. She could never keep it alive. Maybe she could now. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. What if she screamed? What if she didn't remember? Or worse, what if she did? But before I could decide, the door opened. She stood there, holding a cup of coffee, hair pulled back, wearing the same flannel shirt she used to steal from my side of the closet. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, just 1 second, I saw recognition flash across her face, then it was gone, replaced by confusion, then fear. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady, polite. The voice you use for strangers. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. Words got lost somewhere between the past and now. I was just looking for someone, I said finally. She nodded slowly, guarded. "Who?" I smiled weakly. "Someone I used to know." For a moment, we just stood there, 2 people staring across a chasm built out of years, choices, and silence. Then, a voice called from inside. "Babe? Everything okay?" The man appeared behind her, taller than me, wearing my kind of jacket, the kind she used to buy me every Christmas. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. That was all it took. The rest of my words died right there on the porch. "Yeah," she said quietly, turning her eyes back to me. "Everything's fine." I nodded, swallowed hard, and forced a smile. "Sorry for the disturbance." Then I turned to leave. As I reached the edge of the driveway, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It wasn't Sarah. It was Lily. She must have come home early, running up the sidewalk, backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She looked right at me. Curious, polite, not scared. Not familiar, just curious. "Hi," she said. Her voice was light, like the one that used to call out "Daddy" every time I walked through the door. Now it was just, "Hi." I froze. She tilted her head. "Do I know you?" My heart clenched. There it was, the question I'd feared more than any gunshot. I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. I knew your dad. Long time ago," she grinned. "You mean my real dad? The one who was a soldier?" The words hit harder than any blast I'd ever survived. "Yeah," I whispered, voice cracking. "That's the one." Her eyes lit up. "Mom says he was really brave. That he saved people. I wish I could have met him." I swallowed back everything I wanted to say. Every, "I'm right here." Every, "I never stopped loving you." Every scream that had been building for years. Instead, I forced a smile that didn't belong to me. "He'd be proud of you," I said softly. And for a moment, I believed it. She waved goodbye and ran up the steps. Sarah stepped out just long enough to make eye contact again. There were tears in her eyes this time. Not from guilt. Not from anger, just finality. She whispered something I could barely hear. "Thank you. For letting us move on." Then she closed the door. And that sound, that quiet click of the latch, felt like the end of my world. I walked back to the truck, the late afternoon sun burning orange through the windshield. I sat there for a long while before turning the key. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. Not the soldier. Not the husband. Just a stranger. And as I pulled away, I said it out loud, the truth I'd been avoiding since the day I came home. Maybe I did die out there after all. I didn't remember the drive back to base, just miles of empty road, headlights slicing through fog, and a silence so deep it felt alive. Somewhere between leaving her porch and crossing the city limits, I stopped feeling anything at all. When I pulled up to the gate, the young guard saluted me out of habit. "Welcome back, Captain." I nodded but said nothing. I wasn't sure what I was anymore. A captain, a ghost, or just a mistake that somehow survived when it shouldn't have. The base looked smaller now, cleaner, younger faces. New recruits jogging under the same sun I used to curse. Everything kept moving forward, like the world had quietly decided I was expendable. Headed straight for admin, my clearance. Still worked. Muscle memory guiding my fingers. Through access codes I thought I'd forgotten. The clerk at the front desk looked up. "Sir, can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "I need my service file." He frowned, typing fast. "Name?" "Captain Ryan Hale." The tapping stopped. His brow furrowed. Sir, you said Ryan Hale?" I nodded slowly. He turned the monitor slightly, hesitation in his eyes. I'm sorry, Captain, but your status here reads as MIA. My stomach dropped. "What?" He cleared his throat. "Missing in action. Declared in 2019. I blinked, the words refusing to make sense. "I came home in 2022. He shook his head. "Not according to the system." He printed something and slid it across the counter. It was my personnel file, stamped in red. "KIA, confirmed." I stared at it like it was a bad joke, my own obituary, official, sealed, archived. They hadn't forgotten me. They buried me. And suddenly, everything started making sense. The silence. The sold house, the look in Sarah's eyes when she saw me standing there. To her. I was dead. The letter she left behind wasn't betrayal. It was grief. I wasn't the husband who left his family. I was the husband who never came home. I demanded answers. Within the hour, I was sitting in the office of Major Willis, my former commanding officer. He was older now, gray around the edges, but his voice still carried that clipped authority that used to make everyone stand straighter. "Captain Hale," he said, rubbing his temples. "I was hoping this day wouldn't come. Sir, why the hell does the system say I'm dead?" He exhaled slowly. "Because officially you were. Your convoy went missing during the insurgent ambush outside Kandahar. The rescue team recovered your dog tags near a destroyed Humvee. DNA results were inconclusive. We filed the report under presumed KIA." I leaned forward. "Presumed? You didn't think to check when I was recovered 3 days later?" He avoided my gaze. "Your rescue wasn't recorded properly. Communications went dark. New command rotation, your name, fell through the cracks." "Through the cracks?" My voice rose, echoing off the walls. "I lost my family because of a clerical error?" He didn't answer, and that silence was louder than any apology could have been. I stood up, pacing the room. "You let them bury me." Willis finally met my eyes. "It wasn't intentional. You were gone for months. We had to notify next of kin. Your wife, she was devastated." I stopped cold. "She believed it?" He nodded. "She came here. Saw the report herself. She even asked for confirmation from DC. We gave it to her." He sighed, guilt flickering in his expression. "She didn't want a funeral. Said you wouldn't have wanted one. She took the folded flag and left." I sat down heavily. A folded flag. That was all she got of me, and she had every reason to believe that was all she'd ever get. I asked to see the full report. He hesitated, then reached into a cabinet and pulled out a classified folder, sliding it across the desk. "This doesn't leave this room," he warned. Inside were photos, charred vehicles, coordinates, casualty lists. Next to my name, status, KIA, confirmed. Someone had signed off on it. Someone had decided I was easier to mark as gone than to correct later. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since the battlefield. Rage, not at Sarah, not at the man who now lived in my house, at them. The system that could lose a man, write his death and move on like it was paperwork. I traced my name with my finger, the ghost of my identity, and whispered, "You buried me alive." That night I sat alone in my quarters, the file still on the desk. For hours I stared at the pages, my entire life reduced to reports, signatures and a single red stamp. I thought of Sarah again, holding that folded flag, telling our daughter her father died a hero, and maybe that's what broke me the most, because for once, the lie had been kinder than the truth. I picked up my dog tags, the metal cold against my skin. For 3 years, they were proof that I existed. Now they just felt like relics from someone else's life. Later that week, I met with the base administrator to request reinstatement, an official correction to my record. He skimmed through my file, then looked up. Almost apologetic. "I can submit the paperwork, sir, but once a death is certified and benefits are issued, reversing it can take years." "Benefits?" I asked. He hesitated. "Your wife received survivor compensation. She probably built her new life on that. If your file is corrected, that could all be revoked." I stared at him in disbelief. "So if I come back to life, she loses everything?" He nodded slowly. "That's why we usually advise discretion. Discretion. That was their word for erasure, for pretending I was still dead so their records could stay clean." I walked out without another word. That night I sat outside the barracks under a sky full of stars, the same ones I used to write to Lily about, and I thought about what coming home really meant. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about being recognized for it. But now, even the government didn't know I was alive, and maybe that was fitting, because the man who left all those years ago, he really did die out there. And what came back? was just someone trying to figure out what was left to live for. They called it a ceremony, but it felt more like a burial, for the man I used to be. When I got the call from the defense office, I almost didn't answer. A woman's voice, polite but detached, said, "Captain Ryan Hale, the department wishes to present you with the Distinguished Service Medal, posthumously awarded following the Kandahar operation." I laughed. Posthumously? Yes, sir. You were declared KIA in 2019. Clearly, I said dryly, you're calling a ghost. There was a pause. Then she asked, uncertain, "You're alive?" The line went quiet for a long time after that. A week later, I stood on the same parade ground I'd left years ago. They had patched the bullet holes in the walls, repainted the barracks, even renamed the training field. Everything looked different, except the air. That same smell of dust, oil, and faint regret. A young colonel I didn't recognize greeted me at the gate. "Captain Hale, it's an honor to meet you," he said, his tone rehearsed. "Is it?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He led me to the stage where a crowd of unfamiliar faces stood, soldiers too young to remember my name, officers who only knew me from files stamped KIA. Someone handed me a polished medal inside a velvet box. I stared at it, the golden eagle, the blue ribbon, the inscription that read, "For gallantry, beyond the call of duty." The irony nearly made me choke. They were giving me a medal for dying, not for surviving. The colonel cleared his throat and began, reading a citation. Captain Ryan Hale displayed extraordinary heroism during the 2019 Kandahar offensive. Despite overwhelming enemy fire, he ensured the safety of his unit before succumbing to injuries sustained in action. Succumbing to injuries. That was their version of my story. Clean. Tragic. Convenient. The audience clapped politely. No one noticed my hands trembling. When the colonel pinned the medal to my chest, he whispered, "You should be proud, Captain." I looked him in the eye and said, "Tell me, what part should I be proud of? The part where you buried me, or the part where my daughter thinks I'm a ghost?" He froze. For a moment, the mask slipped. Then he smiled again, that bureaucratic smile that hides guilt behind duty, and stepped back. After the ceremony, I stood alone under the flagpole staring at the medal. The medal felt heavy in my palm, not because of honor, but because of everything it represented: lies, paperwork. A system that needed heroes, even if it had to invent them. A reporter approached me. Microphone in hand. "Captain Hale, can we get a statement for the record?" I turned to her slowly. "What record?" "About your return, your service, your sacrifice." I almost laughed. "You want a quote?" She nodded eagerly. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Tell them this medal cost me my family. That's the price of duty." She lowered her microphone. For a moment, she didn't know whether to comfort me or walk away. She chose the latter. That night, I sat in my quarters again, the medal on the table beside the file I wasn't supposed to read. Side by side, they looked like opposites, one celebrating my death, the other proving my existence, both written by the same hands that had erased me. I wondered, how many more soldiers were buried alive by clerical errors and silence? How many families mourned ghosts while the living walked unnoticed through the ruins of their own lives? I thought about Sarah again, and the new man in her life. Maybe she kept the flag somewhere, folded neatly in a drawer. Maybe Lily sometimes took it out, touching it the way kids do when they want to feel close to something they can't understand. And maybe, in her eyes, I'd always be the man who died a hero, never the one who came back a stranger. Maybe that was the only version worth remembering. A few days later, a colonel from headquarters summoned me. He wanted to review my situation, which really meant decide what to do with a soldier who was supposed to stay dead. He was a clean-shaven man with medals stacked across his chest like currency. He gestured for me to sit. "I've read your file, Captain Hale." "Quite a complicated case." "Complicated?" I said. "Try tragic." He smiled faintly. I understand your frustration. But this incident isn't unique. Administrative losses happen in the fog of war. Losses, I repeated. You mean lives. He nodded, tone clinical. Yes, well, semantics aside, I cut him off. You ruined mine. He folded his hands. Look, Captain, I can push for an official correction, but it's a process. It might be cleaner for everyone if you accepted a quiet discharge and retired under your current status. My current status? I hissed. You mean dead? He didn't blink. It's what the system recognizes. That's when I realized I wasn't supposed to come back. My existence was an inconvenience, a glitch they wanted to tidy up. The medal wasn't an honor, it was a lid on my coffin. That night, I went to the sea cliffs outside the base. It was quiet there, just wind, waves, and the kind of silence you can scream into without anyone hearing. I held the medal in my hand, staring at the way the moonlight caught its edge, and I thought about what duty really meant. Was it loyalty to a flag? Or to the people we swore to protect, including the ones we left behind? I unpinned the medal and held it out over the cliff. The wind tugged at it, begging to take it. I hesitated, not because I wanted to keep it, but because throwing it away felt too easy. This wasn't about rejection, it was about truth. So instead, I took out my dog tags, scratched, burned, blood-stained, and looped the medal through the chain, the dead and the living, together, two halves of a life that never should have split. Then I whispered, for what it's worth, I did my duty, but it cost me everything, and for the first time in years I cried. Not for the war or the loss, but for the man I'd tried so hard to be, the one who still believed that honor could survive the lies that built it. It's strange how silence changes once you stop fighting it. At first, it feels like punishment. Then, over time, it starts sounding like peace. Months had passed since the ceremony. The medal still hung from my dog tags, tucked in the same box that held the letter Sarah wrote before she left. The letter I used to curse. Now, I read it like scripture. If you ever find your way home, Ryan, I hope you find peace there, because ours won't be the same. Back then, those words felt cruel. Now I knew they were mercy. She hadn't shut the door on me. She'd just accepted that the man she loved didn't make it back from that desert. Only his shadow did. I left the base quietly one morning. No farewell. No paperwork, just a duffel, a uniform folded inside, and a silence that felt heavier than any goodbye. The world outside didn't recognize me anymore. Traffic lights blinked like they always had. Kids laughed on street corners, shop owners shouted morning greetings, but it all felt foreign, like I was walking through someone else's dream. I found a small cabin near the coast, cheap rent, broken heater, view of the ocean, perfect for a man who didn't know where he belonged. At night, I'd sit on the porch, watching the waves roll in, steady, relentless, cleansing. Each crash felt like a reminder. No matter how much the tide takes, it always returns. I started writing again, not reports, not mission logs, letters to Sarah, to Lily, to the men we lost. I never mailed them. They weren't meant to be sent, just spoken, every word a confession, every paragraph a piece of the man I used to be finding its way back. Sometimes I'd imagine Lily reading them one day, maybe as an adult, and realizing that her father didn't vanish because he stopped loving her. He vanished because the world he belonged to had no room for the living. One morning, I drove past the old neighborhood. The house looked smaller. The porch swing was gone. The garden overgrown. A stranger was mowing the lawn, a man with gray hair and kind eyes. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Sarah, older, stronger, smiling at something on the counter, and next to her, Lily. She was taller now, a teenager. Her laugh cut through the air like sunlight. I'd know that sound anywhere. For a long moment, I just watched, not as a husband, not as a father, just As a man who finally understood what letting go meant, they were happy, they were safe, and that was enough. I turned the engine back on and drove away before anyone could notice the ghost parked across the street. That night, I lit a fire outside the cabin. The sea breeze carried the smell of salt and ash. I took out the metal, that polished lie, and the letter. Both had been heavy for too long. I didn't burn them out of anger. I burned them to make space. As the flames rose, the metal turned black, the paper curled, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Not free, exactly, but whole, because maybe home isn't a house or a name, or even the people we lose. Maybe it's the moment we stop running from the version of ourselves that survived. I started volunteering at a local veterans shelter. Men like me, the forgotten, the misfiled, the ones the war forgot to kill properly, came there for coffee, warmth, and silence. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. A nod was enough. A shared stare was a kind of prayer. One night, a young soldier sat across from me, hands shaking, eyes hollow. He whispered, "They sent me home, but I don't feel like I'm back." I smiled sadly. "You won't, not for a while. Maybe not ever." "But that's okay," he frowned. "How do you live with that?" I thought for a long time before answering. You stop waiting for the world to welcome you back, and you start building a home inside yourself instead. He didn't respond. Just nodded, like he understood more than words could explain. Sometimes I still dream about Kandahar. The sound of the rotors, the sandstorms, the smell of diesel and dust. In those dreams, I'm back in the convoy, but this time I don't try to escape. I let it happen, because that's where the man I used to be stayed behind, and that's okay. He served his purpose. Now I serve mine. Last week, I got a letter, forwarded from the Department of Defense. Inside was a form. My record had finally been corrected. Status: active. Returned. It didn't feel like victory, just closure. I folded it neatly and placed it in the same box where the medal once was, not as proof of life, but as proof that even ghosts can find their way home. Sometimes, when the wind howls against the cabin walls, I hear echoes of my daughter's laughter, like the universe reminding me that love doesn't die. It just changes shape. And in those moments, I close my eyes and whisper to the waves, "I made it home, kiddo. Not the one we built, but the one I carry within." Then I breathe, steady, quiet, alive, and let the tide wash over what's left of me. Would you like me to create the full SEO package now? YouTube description with hashtags, search tags, and thumbnail body footer text for this final completed story. I left my family for duty, but they forgot to wait for me?